Welcome to the 22nd episode of the See Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on disabilities and the champions with them. My name is Lance Johnson, and I am your host. And before I introduce this week's special guest, I wanted to give a quick little refresher of myself for all of the new listeners out there that might want to know a little bit more about who I am. Again, my name is Lance Kestrel Johnson. I am 30 years old. I live in Brooklyn, New York, where I self-produce this podcast as well as work as a freelance video editor. I live and create with retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative eye disease that affects my peripheral vision and my eye's ability to adapt to low light situations. When it comes to this podcast is purely a passion project that I squeeze in between my paid work as a video editor. As of now, I don't make any money from this podcast, and honestly, I lose money making this podcast. But that's completely fine because I get a ton out of these conversations personally, and the message behind these conversations are super positive and thought-provoking. As I mentioned earlier, this is a podcast that was built to create transparency on disabilities. As someone living with retinitis pigmentosa, I wanted to specify where I'm at in terms of my vision loss. As we all know, vision loss is a wide spectrum. So here's where I'm at on my journey. I haven't been to a retinal specialist in several years, so I can't provide exact numbers for my visual field. And while I do have most of my central vision intact, and I'm not considered legally blind, my peripheral vision has diminished enough to make me decide to give up driving as it didn't feel safe anymore. I do not use a white cane, but maneuvering through New York City can be a slow and difficult task for me. Anyways, that's a super short description. I just wanted my listeners to have a more specific take on where I currently stand with my vision, as it may help paint a better picture of where I'm coming from during these conversations. Speaking of conversations, today's guest is Catarina Rivera, otherwise known as the Blindish Latina. Our conversation was full of amazing sound bites, and I really think this episode is going to deliver the goods for everyone who is listening. Catarina is a public speaker and educator who describes herself as a disability stigma smasher, which you will hear more about during our conversation. Catarina was born with Usher syndrome, which is an inherited condition characterized by progressive vision and hearing loss. In fact, the vision loss is due to retinitis pigmentosa, which is what I was also born with. The hearing loss occurs due to the gene mutations that affect the retina also affect the cochlea, which is a sound transmitting structure of the inner ear. Catarina is my first guest with Usher syndrome, and since I have RP myself, I had quite a bit of questions for her. On that note, let's get that conversation going. Here's episode 22 of the See Through Podcast. Enjoy. Catarina, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got it. Sometimes I will introduce myself and be like, "Hi, I'm Catarina Rivera," and y'all can deal with it.
You don't want to hear me say that way. I would totally mess it up. I wouldn't sound good. I'll say it super proper. Catarina Rivera. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Lance.
How are you doing on this fine Thursday?
I am okay. It's been a long week, but I'm actually looking forward to this conversation with you, so you can consider this the bright spot of my day.
Hey, same here. Same here. We've been communicating back and forth for a while, figuring out a time, and it's nice to finally make it happen.
Yeah.
So, let's start with the most basic, simple question there is. Can you tell the listeners who you are?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Catarina Rivera, or as Lance said, Catarina Rivera. And I have a brand called Blindish Latina. Because I'm a person living with Usher syndrome, I wanted to raise awareness, provide education, and also raise my voice to advocate and share best practices. I speak about disability as a broad topic, but also specifically the conditions that I deal with, because I deal with vision and hearing loss. And I find that there's a huge lack of awareness out there, and we don't have enough allies, and we need more allies. So that's what I do. I was diagnosed when I was 17, and I'm from the United States, but my family is from, my mother's side is from Cuba, and my father's side is from Puerto Rico. So being a person with a disability within the Latino community is also something that I wanted to represent and show myself as a person who has multiple identities, because unfortunately, a lot of times within society, we see disability represented with white people only. And that's not the case as far as who does have a disability in our world.
That's completely fair, and a good point to bring up. You said your brand is called Blindish Latina. For those listening, if you want to follow her, give her a follow on Instagram. That's her handle, right? At Blindish Latina?
Yes, Blindish Latina. That's the handle.
Nice. Yeah, so you mentioned you were diagnosed at 17 with Usher syndrome. Can you tell us a little bit about what Usher syndrome is?
Usher syndrome is the most common genetic cause of combined deafness and blindness. Worldwide, more than 400,000 people are estimated to have Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome can affect vision, hearing, and balance. For the vision part of Usher syndrome, people experience progressive vision loss due to retinitis pigmentosa, also known as RP, which causes the gradual deterioration of the retina, resulting in night blindness and also a narrowing of the visual field. And I know that you have RP, and RP is something that people can have without having Usher syndrome. But if you have both hearing loss and vision loss, then that's something that falls under Usher syndrome in this way. Some people with Usher syndrome have significant issues with balance, and it really depends on what type of Usher syndrome that you have. There are 3 clinical types, type 1, type 2, and type 3. And in one of the types of Usher syndrome, people experience a progressive loss of vision and hearing. I have Usher type 2. So what I'm experiencing is that progressive loss of vision, but my hearing should remain mostly stable. I have seen a drop in my hearing over time, but not enough of a drop to say that my hearing is declining. So that is, in a nutshell, Usher syndrome.
And you have Usher syndrome type 2?
Yes.
So you were diagnosed at 17. Was that because you were experiencing symptoms and you wanted to get them looked at and then you discovered it? Or did you know, does this run in your family? Did you have a hint that you had it or anything like that?
That's a great question. I have to give credit to my diagnosis to my mother. My brother and I both have Usher syndrome, and I'm the older child, so I was their first child. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I was diagnosed with the hearing loss, and I was fitted with hearing aids. I was in special education. I received speech therapy. I had an IEP, and then I was mainstream, which means I was in regular classes. So for all of my childhood, I dealt with wearing hearing aids, and I was pretty well adapted to it. We never knew why I had hearing loss. We never knew why my brother had hearing loss. But when I was in high school, I remember a pivotal moment where I realized something was wrong with my vision. I was away for summer camp with my karate school, and we were in the woods. It was nighttime, and we were having so much fun. This was just like a really fun week of activities. And it was nighttime, and all of my friends were running outside of the cabin to go play a prank on one of our instructors. And they just ran out. And when you left the cabin, there were a few steps, and then there was like a path. And I was probably the last one. When I got out, I saw them run away like so easily. I could not see anything. So I was like, oh my gosh, there's a huge difference between me and them. And it was the first time that I was ever confronted with something like that. So I did share that with my family. And my mother also noticed that I would bump into things sometimes. And that's not something that I really noticed. But she read an article where a woman had shared her experience with Usher syndrome. And when my mom read that article, she saw me in that article. And she felt like we needed to go get tested and see if this is something that was going on, because we already kind of had seen some things. But she really felt called after she read that article to take us. We went to Johns Hopkins, to the eye center. And it was just me at first, I believe. And so the doctor did all the tests. And he said to my parents that I had Usher syndrome. I remember the moment of diagnosis, I felt such an overwhelming need to be strong because I knew this was going to be really hard for my parents. I already had a disability, and now this felt like a tragedy on top of that. It was big news. And I remember feeling like very stoic in that moment, but definitely over the years that followed, I had to deal with a sense of loss. I had to deal with grief. I had to deal with denial, and just kind of all the emotional journey that comes from disability and the way that society teaches you that disabilities are so bad. So it's a lot to deal with. But yeah, I was 17 right before college, and it was just a big moment in my life. And then my brother was diagnosed very shortly after that because I wanted to get him tested as well. It did not run in my family, although we have some people in my family that have unexplained hearing loss.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's interesting because, like you said, I have RP, and as far as I know in my family, like heritage just starts with my mom. So it's hard to look back and decipher which is which. But yeah, so having Usher syndrome, one thing I find fascinating by it is I have retinitis pigmentosa. What specifically ties RP to hearing loss? Like, why is it not two separate things, and why is it one condition called Usher syndrome?
I will do my best to explain based on what I know, but I want to put a caveat that I'm not a medical professional. My understanding is that a syndrome, the definition of a syndrome is that it's a combination of different symptoms and conditions that they group together. So because you are presented with RP plus the hearing loss, I believe that is why it's classified as a syndrome.
That sounded good to me.
Please double check.
But yeah, that's what, when I was doing research on Usher syndrome, and you're my first guest with Usher syndrome, and so I just have a lot of questions for you, because it's interesting because it's paired with what I have. I don't know, it adds a whole new dimension to the conversation about having RP, so. Yes,
I have the combo pack.
So you were diagnosed at 17. That's like a pretty, pivotal age to be diagnosed with something. You just finished high school. You're going to head into your college years. You already had hearing loss, so you've kind of come to terms with that. And then now you have to wrap your head around potentially losing your vision. And you mentioned you had stages of denial and to acceptance. What kind of timeline, were you working with from the time you were diagnosed to today? How have your viewpoints changed?
That's a great question, and a big one, because the journey is so deep and nuanced. I've definitely seen major shifts from the time that I was 17. I've had now 17, 18 years after that to deal with it. I think when I was in college, I had a lot of fear about my safety because I was going to a completely new environment where I had to make new friends. And I realized that when I was out at night, I was dealing with a lot of challenges, and someone could potentially take advantage of me, or I could potentially end up in a dangerous situation. So I felt really challenged by that. And it's definitely a moment where whenever I feel out of control, I do try to look for a solution. I try to look for a way that I can adapt. So what I did is I decided not to drink alcohol when I was in college so that I wouldn't impair myself any further. And this was my personal choice. It made me feel better. It made me feel safer. And it increased my awareness of my surroundings. When I was at night, I put myself in the best possible position that I could be in. And it's funny because I, as a blind girl, ended up being the sober driver for all of my friends during all of college. But they would help me go to the bathroom in the club. You know, they would let me know if someone I was dancing with was cute or not. And I made all these adaptations. I had a great time in college. As I made my next major life decision, I took my vision into account. I had to decide, where was I going to live after school? Where was I going to try to get a job? And I decided to move to New York City for multiple reasons, not just because of my vision, but it all lined up very well. I wanted to work with the Latino population. I wanted to have an impact on my people. And I was going into education through Teach for America. So I became a bilingual educator in the Bronx. I also wanted to be an independent young person, an adult who could move about freely. And I was very concerned about driving. I did get into an accident my last year of school where I made a left-hand turn at night, and I thought a car was slowing down and that the headlights were slowing down, but they were not slowing down. Unfortunately, no one was hurt. My car was totaled, but no person was hurt. And I decided I didn't want to drive anymore. I wanted to stop driving before something worse happened, or I was taken, someone took away my license. So I moved to New York because they have great public transportation and I can go anywhere without a car. And unfortunately, when you look at the major cities in the United States, there are not many cities where you have transportation, public transportation that covers the whole city and is easy to use. So that already kind of limited my choices. But I was excited about moving to New York. It was a big adventure for me, and it was something that I always had dreamed about or thought about. So it lined up very well, but it also allowed me to adapt to my disability. And I think once I moved to New York, I denied my disability for a while. I knew that it affected me and my friends knew about it, but I didn't receive services. I didn't look for services. I didn't want to do anything else with it other than the adaptations that I made. One thing that was constant is I was always involved in the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and I was always connected to them and their work, and I do appreciate that. I think after about 8 years is when I first started receiving services from the state. And that was a point that I was ready. But they basically came to my house and they assessed my house for safety. They bought some equipment that could help me do things in my house in a safer manner. For example, an induction burner so that there wasn't a gas flame, a different water kettle, not one that you might touch and it's hot, like one that has protection and different things. But at that time, I was not ready to use a blind cane. And the trainer that I was working with kind of pushed me into some training sessions with a blind cane. And that left a negative experience for me. It was in my neighborhood. I was very concerned about standing out and for people to see me with a blind cane because I wasn't ready. I was not ready. And so I didn't really learn anything. She taught me some stuff, but I did not retain it. And then maybe 2 years later, so now we're talking about 10 years in to my journey, I said, I don't want to be stressed out anymore walking from my work to the subway station in Midtown. It is busy. I don't want to bump into a child and knock them down anymore. I don't want to bump into people and have them be upset with me. I want to relax. I want to have a tool that helps me, and I'm ready to start learning about using a blind cane again. So I reached out to them, and they sent me another trainer. And he would come and meet me near my job, and I would train in Midtown. And it was really fun for me at that time because I was ready to learn. I love dancing, and I've been salsa dancing for many years. And I found using the blind cane to be very similar to dancing because you have to follow a certain rhythm. You're sweeping the area before you're going to step there, and then you're going to the other side to sweep that area before you're going to step. So you're going opposite. And I finally learned, and I started to use my cane. That was a really hard time for me because I knew that I needed it, but I also knew that I was being watched and judged every time I took out my blind cane. And I was now not an anonymous person anymore in New York City. So I realized that people would probably question why I was wearing glasses, like regular glasses and a blind cane, or why I was taking out my phone on the subway that had a blind cane. Or sometimes I would like take it out, just randomly. But I just basically kept working on it and eventually told myself, like, I have to stop caring about what people think. I have to get more confident and not worry about opinions of others because I need the blind cane and I need to use it properly. Because when I was trying to look more blind to people and fit in their ideals of what a blind person does when they walk on the street, I was actually not using the vision that I had. I would cross when it said to go and cross, and I wouldn't turn my head to look for cars. So I was actually being unsafe in that regard. And I'm really glad to say that I strengthened that muscle, that acceptance muscle that I don't care what other people think. I feel like it's a muscle that you strengthen over time. And I used a blind cane without worrying what people think. I even started to use it in foreign countries when traveling. I found it to be so helpful. So people would help me and I could get assistance when I needed it and go to new places without fear and new areas. Because if you're not a person with vision loss, perhaps you don't understand the stress that it takes to navigate a new area. It takes a lot of effort, and you might like something like travel. Like I love traveling, but sometimes I would not want to leave my hotel room because I wasn't ready to expend all that effort that it takes to get out there and figure out where I'm going. But now I've accepted my disability and I'm totally public about it on Blindish Latina. I'm sharing my stories and I feel so powerful right now. I want everyone to know that wherever they are in their journey is okay. They should not beat themselves up or try to fast track themselves to acceptance and, oh, I'm a disability advocate if they're not ready to do so. That is totally okay to be where you are and to feel your emotions and go through that journey. So I hope that I can be a supportive person to others and that I can educate so that the world is more accessible and people with disabilities have to do less work to fit into a world that's not made for them.
Wow. I have a lot to talk about with that because we have so much in common, like I moved to New York City for the same exact reason, the public transit and also work reasons, but mainly just public transit. And I didn't feel like driving anymore. And in terms of, the transition from denial to acceptance, I started this podcast for that very reason. I'm definitely still in the beginning stage of my journey, on that. And I think I'm so far from the end result of whatever that's going to be for me in terms of acceptance. And I think it's awesome that I'm doing this podcast because I feel like, and I've talked to people who have listened to this podcast and they feel like the same exact way you described, you felt how I feel And this is like an outlet for me to be more open and learn, firsthand from people like you and other people. And I get inspiration from stories like what you just said. So thanks for sharing that. I have thoughts all the time too, because I'll take the subway or I'll go up on my own, especially when it's night, take my dog out at nighttime. And it's like people don't understand that you have to kind of mentally commit before going places, especially new places. And I don't use a cane yet, and I 100% need to start training on that. I just don't know where to begin. And maybe subconsciously there's a little bit of denial still there. I'm just trying to hold on to not using it. And there's all these other avenues I should probably start exploring just so I can get familiar, because I am a huge advocate for being as independent as you can. And that's 100% why I brought you on. So we can talk about things like this and the thoughts that come through that journey. And then your journey's probably still going on, so it's like, it's a never ending thing. So it's just interesting to me that we're both here talking. You're further along the journey. I'm somewhere in the middle. It's kind of like a weird feeling to kind of hear firsthand someone describe thoughts that I've thought, because I don't talk to people with RP that often unless it's really on my podcast. So and then especially people in New York, and I don't know, it's just interesting. And you had a lot in that story about like not drinking alcohol. I definitely drink alcohol. A side note there, like I would use the excuse like, oh, if I ran into someone and there was drinking involved, you can just say, oh, I'm a little bit tipsy or things like that. So I used that excuse and kind of like that aspect of alcohol, I guess, in terms of, and it also made me relax a little bit, like, in whatever, I have mixed feelings about alcohol, but yeah, I don't know. There's so much to unpack in what you said in terms of how you felt when you were diagnosed through college, learning to use the cane, how there's a rhythm to it. And one thing that stood out to me a lot was you talked about when you first started learning to use the cane, because that's something I'm interested in doing. And then you mentioned that you weren't ready. And then it started getting me to think, am I ready? Like, would I be comfortable practicing that, in my building where I currently live, people seeing me? Because that's something I've never thought of before, And maybe let's talk about that, because that's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I would like that, to be honest with you. I don't know what that tells me about myself, but I don't think I would feel comfortable with people in my neighborhood, who see me without a cane, all of a sudden see me with a cane. And then I also want to talk to you about people's perceptions of you within the city, because you talked about how you would have your cane, but you're also looking at your phone, and then you had to kind of deal with what people's perception of blindness is, so yeah, I mean, I think first let's talk about your first days of training with the cane and kind of what went through your brain there.
I'm so struck by what you said about the experience you're having, hearing someone else say thoughts that were in your own head. I think that's beautiful and very powerful. And that's one of the reasons to be in community with each other. And I find that on Instagram, there is a very positive community around different types of disability and just disability in general, where you see people write words and you're like, yes, someone else is thinking the same thing. They're angry about the same things. And it's a good feeling to know that you're not alone, and to know that there are people out there that are having similar experiences, I think is very helpful. So you've asked me about the first times using the cane and the training. Yes, I was upset when the trainer pushed me to do a session spontaneously. She had a cane with her. She did not clear it with me. I did not know that we were going to be practicing using a blind cane. And we were at my house. So we were in my neighborhood. We were where I lived. And I am a very involved person in my neighborhood. I was a community organizer for a local group. And I also had a job for a few years where I was doing community engagement in my community. So I think the reason why I didn't want people to see me using a blind cane was because it's a training session. You're not comfortable yet, and you also have someone else with you, and that looks kind of weird. I didn't want to have conversations with people that knew me, or just like to explain what was going on. I just wanted to have a safe space where I could learn, where it was just about the learning and I wouldn't be distracted by anything else. So I think that was part of it, just because it didn't feel like a safe space to do it in public in a place where people might know me or see me or want to speak to me. And I would be distracted by that. Yeah. So I don't think it was about like not wanting to use a cane eventually. I just hadn't made the decision at that time to get training. So I also felt like my agency had been taken away by having a trainer push it on me instead of asking me or discussing it with me. And that was unfortunately due to that trainer's specific personality and the way that she approached it. I do think it's very important to work on the emotional side and the mental side of having a disability, and not just the equipment and the tools and the programming. So that basically left me to do the emotional work on my own. I didn't really have support for doing the emotional work of getting ready to use a blind cane. So for me, what really happened is that I got fed up. I got fed up with the stress. And when in the wintertime, it got dark earlier, and yet another winter where I was leaving my office and it was nighttime, I was concerned for my safety and I was stressed out. And it was only one avenue to walk to the train, but that was enough. It was enough stress for me. So I'm really glad that I reached out and I got a different trainer and I did the sessions near my job. The thing about being in Midtown is that it's so busy. I didn't expect to really see anybody from my job. And I expected to be pretty anonymous, even though I was in Midtown. We would go a few blocks away and then take the cane out. And that was something that the trainer was very understanding of. So the sessions were a little bit weird, but I think I was able to focus on the learning. And it was much safer, in my view, like as a safe space. So I focused on the training, I learned the skills, but then you still have to practice on your own. And I had to figure out, like, how was I going to take the cane with me and hold it and put it away, and where was I going to store it? And I find that I've talked to other people, blind people about this, and we all are doing different things. It's actually very interesting. People are coming up with their own solutions. One woman said to me, I custom designed a bag and they made it for me. It's leather. It goes, crossbody bag. Men, a lot of times put it in their backpack. So like a computer bag, but women hang like these carabiners, I think, like the hooks with the screw thing. They hang it from their purse, or they do different things to take the canes with them. But after I got the training, I just really wanted to not have stress. So I started using it. But I wouldn't always use it when I was going to be in situations where I was around people that I knew. And I remember specifically when I was dating, I would use the cane probably up to a block away and then put it away, unless I was there early. If I was there early, I would use it all the way into the restaurant or wherever the meeting place was, and then get situated and then put it away. But eventually, I had to really think about, why did I care so much about what an anonymous person thought? Like, that was the first hurdle to get over. From just walking past someone in the street, why do I care? And how I'm giving them too much power over my life. And I need to the cane. It's helpful to me. It is helpful to me. So let me use something that is helpful for me. Then I think the next step was, why do I care about somebody that knows me seeing me with the cane? And that was a harder one to get over. I think that I switched it to something empowering. Let them see me with the blind cane. Let them learn about blindness. Let them ask me a question and I'll answer. But it is normal for me to use a cane. It is normal. And I'm going to do what is normal for me. I'm going to use it because I need it and it's beneficial for my life. And if that bothers someone else, if they have a question, well, okay, if they ask me respectfully, I can dialogue with them. I can educate them. They can learn. They can learn that there's many ways to be blind. There's many ways that people, blindness is a spectrum. They can learn that. They need to learn that. And if they have a problem with it, then that's not a person that I need in my life. They shouldn't have a problem with it. But I also think that by using it with confidence, when I was confident about it, people were more intrigued. And it wasn't a negative experience for me in most cases. It was just like, oh, okay. It's something that makes you stand out. And so if you have something that makes you stand out and you want to educate people, like I kind of just use that to talk to people and just be out here. It's like, okay, this is what blindness looks like. And I'm going to dance and I'm going to have a good time with my friend. And you can talk to me, So I think it took a while, but I think it's really helpful to be out and public and using the blind cane whenever I need it. Definitely there have been encounters where people are questioning my use of the phone. That's been a particular one, especially on the subway. But it depends on how somebody approaches me. If they ask me respectfully, I will talk to them and I'll explain to them that I have central vision, but I don't see on the side, or just very simple explanations. And that's always what I've done now. When I first started disclosing my disability and telling people about Usher syndrome, I would say to them, I'm going blind. And I would cry. And I was so emotional about it because it was something that was so upsetting to me. It was news. And I was 17. It was huge. It was huge to hear that. So probably for 4 to 5 years after that, I was stuck in that tragedy space. Tragedy of my life is that I am going blind. And if I am going to talk about it, it's going to be this emotional disclosure that's going to be very painful. And people are going to feel sorry for me. Now I don't say that. I've gotten over, I've accepted, and I realize my life can be great, and it is great. And I'm doing more than probably some able-bodied people out there. I'm living a life of purpose. I'm very aligned to what it is that I want to do in the world, and my disability is just a part of me. So when I speak about my diagnosis or blindness, I don't even say the name of my condition anymore, because what I am trying to do is communicate my needs most of the time. So if I'm in a fitness class back when the world was normal, I would say, I have hearing loss. I'm reading your lips. Can you look at me when you speak? So I would always have like 2 or 3 sentences. What is it that they need to know? What do I need? That's all I'm going to say. So if I'm leaving a restaurant, I don't see well at night. Can I hold your arm? It's just, I just started doing that. And those disclosures were things that I could be confident about. If someone wants to know about my condition, I tell them, yeah, I have Usher syndrome. But when I move about in the world, that's not what I found most effective or necessary as far as trying to make sure that situations were accessible to me.
Yeah, again, you said a lot of things that I was like, oh, yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. So, but you said one thing about there's an emotionality about it, and there's also a technicality. You know, there's technical tools, like you have a cane. You know, some people may use screen readers and other different tools. But then there's, you know, the emotional side of it, like what's going on in your brain, acceptance. Are you stressed out about it? Like you said, you went from switching from feeling like it's a tragedy to feeling empowered by it. And I think the emotionality of it is something that people underestimate, especially people, you know, without disabilities. I think it's hard for them to wrap their heads around that, you know, because life itself is full of difficulties and obstacles. And then when you throw on, you know, another layer to it, you know, it's another thing to worry about. And sometimes these layers have little sub layers, you know, like, for example, I don't want to go out at nighttime, so that has to affect my social life, which affects my dating life. You know, simple things like, oh, I want to go to the grocery store, and those things compile, and eventually they can wear you down. So I think the emotionality of it is something to take very serious, and everyone should evaluate and be fine with whatever pace they're doing it. I just think it should be something that's on everyone's radar, I think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important. It takes a lot of energy and self-care, and people need to listen to themselves. And I think just like any other aspect of self-care, creating a plan, creating a support system will help, because it's very easy. And I have been in the situation where I stayed in the space of like, oh, this is really hard for me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go here. And those things are so valid, and they need their space and their time to feel and be felt. If you stay in that space, though, things won't get better. You won't have a better experience the next time. You won't have a way to deal with it. So I do think it's important to both give space to your feelings and also work on the coping and work on the self-care. And there are some days that you're not up for it, and that's okay. I do feel sad, upset when I see that really holds somebody back from doing things that they want to achieve in life. And I know our world can really be an unfriendly place and not welcome people with disabilities. And I hope that we can see changes in our ableism and our society so that we can fully include people with disabilities, and they can contribute all that they have to give, because we have so much to give and so much to share and contribute to the world.
Yeah, I agree completely. And you said something there that's interesting too. You mentioned about self-care. You know, you have to accept yourself when you're alone and you're the only person around. But it's also very helpful to have a strong support system. So it's like finding the right balance between having helpful friends around or loved ones around, and then also feeling comfortable when they're not around. And, you know, when you're by yourself, you don't have to explain anything to anyone. You know, if you want to, you know, take your time walking somewhere. But when you're with people, you do have to learn social cues. You have to speak up for yourself, or else the people around you are not going to learn. And I think that's something I'm still learning, is like, I need to be more outspoken. Like, you know, like help me. A simple thing for me is just like point out obvious obstacles in the sidewalk. If there's like a dip in the sidewalk or a raise in the sidewalk or a step or anything I might miss. And people around me are getting better about that. They'll be like, Lance, step, and it's helpful, things like that. But if I didn't say anything, then how would they know to help me? And then part of me wonders, like, what am I not saying, and how could I be helped even further? But I also, like I said earlier, I'm a firm believer in you should try to be as independent as you possibly can and learn those skills yourself so you can feel empowered and that you're not dependent on others emotionally or technically. You can use your own tools like the cane and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's finding the right balance. If you're getting codependent on friends to help navigate the world, that's something to pull back from, examine, and also, be kind to yourself and anyone who's dealing with this. I do think that it's much better to get to the space of using a cane or whatever tool is going to give you that independence. Some people really prefer guide dogs. And when you get to that space, you're going to see such a difference because especially like walking at night, I felt very similarly to you. Like I wouldn't want to go places. Having the blind cane with me makes me feel much more confident about going out at night. Also entering spaces that are new, like a restaurant. If I don't have my cane, I will act so strangely to another person because I'm just standing there. I get stressed out and my vision narrows and I have to scan the whole space. And I'm really afraid that there's like a step as soon as I enter and the hostess wants to help me and talk to me. And I cannot really process what she is saying at that time. So if I have my blind cane out, I've entered the restaurant with that, then already there's some kind of understanding of like, oh, okay, let me approach her differently or, and I can say whatever I need, that's already kind of set up. But I think if you don't have a tool, you kind of spend a lot of energy, more energy than you need to, on navigating and just being understood by other people. But I was going to say something else to what you were saying.
Well, I was going to say, like I said earlier, life already has so many obstacles and, don't make your life harder than it should be, embrace things that are helpful. And I'm preaching to the choir because, like I said, I haven't even started this process of learning to walk with a cane, but maybe this is the time where there's no more denying that I should probably start that process. So if I were to start that process, we can talk about that afterwards too, because I have other things I want to talk about too. But did you think of what you were saying?
Yes, I remember. When you were speaking about your friends, I was reminded of the fact that when I was receiving services from the Commission for the Blind, I had the same trainer. Actually, I asked her, can you do a training for my friends? And she did oblige. I invited my closest friends to come over. And what she trained them on is how do you lead a blind person around? Because so many people don't know how to do that. Like I have even people in my own family trying to hold my arm. And I'm like, no, I need to hold your arm. Like that does not make sense. Why would you hold my arm? But yeah, so that was the only thing she worked on with them. But I found it to be really a great foundational kind of training. And there are videos out there. So I think for the people that you interact with the most frequently, get them certified, let's get them like a friend of a blind person certification. Watch these videos. We're going to practice like when the space narrows, extend your hand backwards like this. We're going to have a signal for steps and whatever it is. I think that will make people feel good because people who care about you and love you, they want to be able to help you. They want you to be included, and you already have that trust with them. So if they can be better equipped on how to help you better, and then of course you can give them more information about what works for you, then that's going to make them feel good because they can be a part of you having a good time. I have a good friend that she developed this on her own. I cannot take credit for this, but we would go to networking events, and if someone extended their arm for a handshake, she would take my hand, put it right on their hand. And it was great. I loved it because I didn't have to I knew if she was with me that I would not miss a handshake. And she was just like, oh, here you go. And I loved it. And that was really helpful because going around to events in New York, I'm a very social person. And we would always go to networking events. And that's just a moment of, it's difficult because I'm trying to listen to what they're saying. It's usually loud and I have hearing loss. And then I'm also trying not to miss a handshake because the first thing that you say to someone is not like, hey, I have vision and hearing loss. You're just trying to say your name. You're just trying to see if you even want to talk to them. So I find things like that to be really helpful. And I think everybody who has good people in their life can come up with more, ask them to get more education and share resources with them and make it a more positive experience every time you're in a social situation.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and that hasn't been talked about at all so far on my podcast. So I think I'm really glad you touched on that about, including, people around you and education and, learn things yourself, but don't be afraid or don't feel, I think that people around you probably want to learn more about it, so give them the information they need. We've been talking almost an hour and we've covered a lot, and I could cover a million other things, but I think I definitely want to talk to you about what you're doing on social media with the Blindish Latina and the type of content you're posting. One thing that I noticed is you call yourself a stigma smasher. Is that a phrase you coined? Can you tell everyone about that?
I really hope it's not trademarked because I think I came up with it, but there are situations where you think you have a great idea and someone else has already used the term. So I am double crossing my fingers that nobody is using this. But as far as I know, yes, it is something that I coined. I wanted to create a name for the people that are aligned with me, the people that I'm speaking to. And I thought about celebrities, famous singers. Their fans always come up with names for who they are. And I love that. I thought that was really cool. And I was like, who can my people be? And I came up with Stigma Smasher because it's action oriented. I love that it felt very powerful. It's something that you can do every day. You can be a stigma smasher in small and big ways. I also felt that it was inclusive of people with disabilities and allies, because people with disabilities, we can smash stigmas all the time just by exceeding society's expectations of what disability looks like, what disabled people do. We can also educate in our workplace, and a lot of people are already doing this. But I want allies to also take on the responsibility for smashing stigmas alongside us and with us, because we need that allyship. And especially we need people who are in positions of power in society to take on this role of also, I'm here to smash stigmas and be an ally. So that is the term that I'm using. So everybody on Blindish Latina is a stigma smasher.
That's awesome. So I guess I am a stigma smasher.
Welcome to the club.
I always wondered, I wanted to think of like a name for the people who listen to this podcast. And I haven't came up with a name yet. I'm struggling. So congrats on finding your phrase.
posted a video the other day about what is a stigma smasher, because I really wanted to let everybody know why was I using this term. And I got a great response to it. So that was really fun.
Yeah. Your content's very educational, but also like your personality shines through. So I recommend everyone go give Katarina a follow. It's Blindish Latina. I know I've said it like 3 times, but
yes, I'm Blindish Latina. I am talking about my own disability journey. I post about disability awareness in general. I also share best practices and tips, and I engage in advocacy. So I talk about accessibility fails that we see in our world, tools and spaces that are not accessible for people that we really need to be more aware of. So recently I shared about Clubhouse. I also shared about Zoom and the ways these are not accessible for people with disabilities. Today, I posted a graphic about 3 problematic responses to disability. One of them is do not pray over us without our consent. And I've already had people reach out to me and say that this has happened to me. One person commented that this has happened to her more than 10 times. And it is very upsetting to see that people have these experiences, but I know it's out there and it's happening. So I'm going to keep speaking on it. And my goal is for someone to read that who is a potential ally, who didn't know. And I want them to walk away with knowledge and be aware and more understanding of what is the lived experience of a person with disability and what can they do about it. And I always try to make it very concrete and simple. So recently I shared, how do you become a disability ally? Well, 1, you need to care. You need to care. 2, you need to learn. And 3, you need to act. And make it very simple.
yeah, I like the format. And when you say earlier when you said pray, what do you mean by that?
I mean, there are situations in which somebody finds out that you have a disability, whether you have an invisible or a visible disability, and they are a person who is religious, and they feel they should pray for your healing.
Oh, pray. I thought P-R-A-Y. In my head, I was thinking P-R-E-Y.
Oh, no, P-R-A-Y. They pray over you and bless you or say a message.
That's no good. I guess it's coming from a good place, but like, yeah, I understand that. I agree that you should at least ask for consent.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a lot of helpful tips like that. And, you know, for example, you helped me earlier. You emailed me, and there's so much, like I said, I'm still on my journey of learning. But you asked me if I had transcripts of my podcast episodes. And I was like, no. And then it clicked to me. I was like, I definitely should. So yeah, you're already helping me. So you could probably write a long email about other things I could do. So I may hit you up after this for more advice on how to be more accessible in terms of, because you seem to focus on that in terms of how to be accessible on social media.
Yes, I definitely talk about that a lot. I think that the online world, the virtual world, and social media is a place where people with disabilities are being left out on a regular basis, and we just don't see it. We don't see, it's not as visible as, for example, if you have a building that is inaccessible for someone in a wheelchair because there's no ramp, you can get outraged. You can see that's a visible exclusion. But the online space, we're seeing exclusion like that all the time. And people are just in their houses being excluded. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm focused on the online exclusion and making sure that that is being spoken about, especially during the pandemic, because so many things are happening in the virtual space and we need everyone to be included. I also want to speak on the discussion you just had about the transcripts for your podcast. This is an example of a way to smash stigmas on a regular basis in small ways. So every time that you have a frustration, if you are a person with a disability, you might just get frustrated and not do anything about it. But you can send someone a DM. You can comment on their post and say, hey, I'm a person with blindness and your color contrast doesn't work for me. Can you please consider using other colors other than pale pink and white text? Because I can't read your post. Also, you can do an image description, and then I would know what you're saying at least. You know, you can advocate in very small ways that actually matter. And if you're an ally and you start to learn about these things, I would expect you to also be speaking up. And that's something that I want to see happen on a widespread basis, that if you're an ally and you learn that image descriptions are great, that it's not only people with disabilities commenting on someone else's stuff. Hey, can we have an image description? That you could do that as well.
Yeah, it's like if you use image descriptions and no one else uses them, then you're only going to be able to hear the image descriptions for other people in the same situation as you, where you want to have more access to everyone you follow and kind of, you know, make that social media experience better. And I'll admit it, I need to be better about image descriptions myself. So like I said, I'm going to hit you up after this for some tips. And I've had people comment on things I say on the podcast. I get called out. In my head, I'm like, I'm your ally. Like, you don't have to be harsh with your words. There's other ways to word things.
I can empathize with both sides of that, because if someone is continuously experiencing anger or pain about something in the world, then they probably after a while not going to use the nicest language. But I also can see from your side that can be a lot, and you are trying to be aware. So I hope you all can have a dialogue and get to some shared understanding.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm all about dialogue, and that's why I started this podcast. You know, and I just need everyone to know that I'm still learning. I'm new to this whole community. Have some patience. Like you asked me about transcripts, you know, like if you have something that you want to share with me, share it with me. You know, like you know, I'm your friend in this situation, not your enemy. But we've been talking over an hour now, so I don't want to. I know you're a very busy woman, and I don't want to take up your whole day. And I absolutely love this conversation. We talked on a lot of things that the podcast hasn't touched on. We could have talked for another hour. I'm kind of sad we didn't get to talk much about hearing loss and how that's affecting you and things like that, and the more specifics into Usher syndrome. So how about this? We will just have to, you know, set aside another time to talk, and I'll have you on again.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. But last but not least, you know, I have each of my guests give a shout out to a nonprofit or charitable organization that they want to be on people's radars. And I would love to hear, who are you going to talk about?
I'm going to shout out the Foundation Fighting Blindness. I've been involved with them from the time of my diagnosis. They were really an organization that my family turned to learn about what was going to happen to us, what was going on with research, and connect with other people who also had Usher syndrome and other types of blindness. And I also participated in a young professionals group that was running in New York City. And I got to meet other people who had different types of blindness. So I've appreciated the community aspect so much. I really appreciate what they are doing with their annual conference and workshops. I also want to say that I have been thinking a lot about the models of disability where when we focus on looking for a cure, are we sending the wrong message about disability? So I know that their messaging is very much about the research and finding a cure for blindness, which I do think is important and can help many people. But I also don't want the world to think, oh, people with blindness have bad lives, because we do not. we can have wonderful lives, and we do, especially when you accept and you adapt. So that's the only caveat that I want to put.
No, that's a great caveat, and I actually think about that, and that's another thing. You keep throwing things out there that I feel like need to be thrown out there on this podcast. Yeah, I think it's great to look for a cure. It's helpful, obviously, but I think you shouldn't just sit around and wait for a cure. Like I said, you should take the proactive measures to accept yourself, be independent, and teach and educate those around yourself. And, I think too many people hang their hats on the search for the cure, or they get discouraged by a lack of a cure. Right now there's not a cure for Usher syndrome or RP. So you can either take that knowledge and just be immediately defeated and not grow, or you can, take steps to feel empowered and begin that journey like you discussed.
Yes, and recognize all the good things that came from disability, because I know that my life has been forever changed, and I think I've taken more risks and lived more courageously because of it.
Yeah, and I commend you for it, and I respect you a lot for sharing all that with me and everything you do. I'm glad that you exist and you're out there doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated this conversation. I'm looking forward to talking more in the future.
Yeah, definitely. We will. Take care.
You too.
And that does it for episode 22 of the See-Through podcast. And I know everyone enjoyed that conversation with Katarina Rivera. I know I did. Like I said, I'll have to have her back on because we didn't get to cover everything. I really think everyone should go follow Katarina on social media. Her handle is @blindishlatina. Go give her a follow and officially become a Stigma Smasher. And while we're talking social media, do me a huge favor and give the See-Through podcast a follow. The handle is @SeeThroughPod, and that covers Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Additionally, if you haven't yet, subscribe or follow to the podcast on whatever streaming platform you are listening on. That way you'll be the first to hear new episodes and stay up to date with everything about the podcast. I definitely appreciate it. And if you want to do the ultimate favor for me and help the podcast, leave a review and rate the podcast. When you do that, it helps the podcast pop up higher when you search for the podcast, which in turn gives me more listeners, which I would love to have. And as we discussed earlier, if you want to learn about any of the organizations Katarina mentioned in this episode, just click on the show description. And that does it for this week's episode. I'll have another one coming next Sunday, so tune in for that one. And until then, stay transparent.